Good morning, my name is Josh from CyclonesOZ, and today we're going to be taking a look at general weather around the nation of Australia. We've got some rainfall for the New South Wales and Queensland coastline, especially for the south central Queensland coastline, where up to 100 millimetres is possible in the next 10 days. We're also going to be talking about some rainfall possible up in far north Queensland and some very significant cold front activity that is now on the cards for the southwestern corner of Western Australia. That will be the main story, but that later on in the video. We've also got a developing tropical cyclone just outside of the Australian region of responsibility, so we'll also take a look at that towards the end of today's video. If you haven't already, then please consider subscribing and also leave a like on the video while you're at it. Your support is greatly appreciated. We're going to start this video off looking at New South Wales and Queensland with the current rainfall picture. There's really not much to be talking about at this immediate time, and really not much to be talking about over the next 3 or 5 days either. Just a couple of showers rounding the Cape Byron sort of area up towards the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast, but most of the rainfall there is going to be remaining offshore with no significant showers expected to come onshore there, so not really worth talking about. In the next 5 days, there is a significant amount of rainfall possible up in far north Queensland, up to 100 millimetres. It will be between that 50 to 100 millimetre sort of threshold, probably on the lower end of that actually. I'm way overestimated that, but there is still that rainfall expected up there, which is worth noting because they are still very wet, and any more rainfall will just run off into river catchments and probably cause some minor flooding if there was, say, 50 millimetres in a 24-hour period, which is entirely possible still up there. But as we get into the 10-day forecast period, cutting straight to the chase here, there is a little bit more rainfall expected through central Queensland, not so much on the Eastern Repair forecast model, but definitely on the GFS forecast model. What's going to happen is that there's going to be a low pressure area of tropical nature creeping down from the Coral Sea and sending itself offshore from Fraser Island. And that's going to happen a lot later in the forecast period, beginning from about Tuesday next week. Now, as this system slowly develops and wraps itself up a little bit, and definitely not into any tropical cyclone nature, it will be providing the Queensland coastline with a nice round of showers throughout Tuesday, Wednesday, and then into Thursday. And it's going to be a wet week by the looks of things, especially later on in the week. There's going to be a lot of rainfall just sitting onshore in the Queensland area in what could be a couple of thunderstorms as well later on. Thursday and then into Friday, definitely in the later parts of May. And then as we get into the later parts of next week, this low pressure area slowly creeps offshore, but there could still be some very heavy falls around where this low pressure system is centered. It's likely to be more like a kind of an east coast trough, which extends between Mackay and kind of traces the coastline down towards the Sunshine Coast or the Gold Coast and Brisbane, and that will just be driving those showers ashore. Now, looking at these wind marks here, I'm not seeing anything concerning where strong winds are a risk. This is most certainly a trough at this time, and you can see the trough line extending down here, but this low pressure trough, the only threat that it is bringing ashore is rainfall, and I wouldn't even call this a threat. In fact, I'd call this a really good situation to have on the forecast here, where we've got nice rainfall, about 80 to 90 millimetres, which could fall over about 3 days, and this is great news for this part of Queensland, because this is probably the driest part of Queensland right now. They're in desperate need of a little bit of rainfall. Especially if it crept a little bit further north, they'd be welcoming that rainfall with open arms, but it definitely looks like they do need quite a bit of rainfall, and this rainfall should be a little bit of drought relief to some parts of Queensland, especially if 80 or 90 millimetres can get itself over, say, Rockhampton or Bundaberg or something like that. The only unfortunate thing is it's not supported by the Eastern Repair model, which is kind of a model that I would like to have supporting this system to call it a guaranteed on the forecast. Just having the GFS 10 days out for a pretty weak rainfall event like this, I mean, things can change, as we do know. And the Access G3 isn't calling for something like that. It's just calling for all-out madness across Central Australia with tropics and thunderstorm activity in late May up in the Northern Territory, a monster giant cold front to the likes that we don't see very often. In fact, probably once every 5 years, moving over New South Wales and Victoria. This is an absolutely clown forecast from the Access G3, and that's why I'm not going to be using this forecast model to use in any part of this video, because it is a terrible forecast model to be using today. And I think the Bureau of Meteorology has cottoned onto it, because the Access G3, it is their Bureau of Meteorology's own forecast model, but they're not even using it in their forecasts for this round, which is not surprising considering this is just clown activity from the Access G3 model, and it's to the likes that I haven't seen before on a forecast model. So thank goodness that it is 9 or 10 days out in the future, but the GFS model giving us a much more realistic solution here. Of course, don't get me wrong, there's still a chance of thunderstorms firing up from this east coast trough in central Queensland and New South Wales. That happens every every time we get an east coast trough in this region of Queensland, but I'm not calling for all-out mayhem in the Australian tropics to the likes that we don't even see in summer. So again, take all forecasts with a heavy pinch of salt. When you start to see model congruency, that's when we start to believe the forecasts, and it's not something we've really got to date for the eastern states, unfortunately. But in terms of just general rainfall accumulation, it's looking good, especially for Tasmania. A little bit of rainfall as well for Victoria and central New South Wales. So this is a pretty good model run from the GFS, certainly something we're hoping for, because this rainfall is very much needed across southern Australia. Winter is about a month late now, especially for Tasmania and Victoria, and about 2 weeks late now for Western Australia and New South Wales. So it'd be great to get some rainfall happening, and it is basically a guaranteed on the cards now, leading us very nicely into the next part of our video, which is Western Australia. The forecast for Western Australia, especially the southwest corner, is looking fantastic, and I'm absolutely stoked to be presenting this good news, because this is great news. I don't even think good news can cover it. There is a little bit of rainfall that's going to be moving in, especially from the Capes later on tomorrow night and into Saturday morning as well, from a weak cold front that's going to be brushing the southwest coast. Could be a couple of thunderstorms even Friday night into Saturday morning. Another weak cold front moving through Saturday afternoon before a couple of days of dry weather until early on next week, probably about more mid-Monday into Monday afternoon. A bit of rainfall moving through the Perth area, and it will make it as far north as Kalbarri by the looks of things. So the rainfall will be shared around pretty evenly across the southwest corner of Western Australia, and that is going to lead to 5-day rainfall accumulations around the Perth metro. Nothing too crazy, only about 20 to 25 millimetres or so, and down towards the southern Capes about 20 to 25 millimetres there, but a couple of drops of rainfall expected as far north as Geraldton. I know it's nothing to write home about, but any amount of rainfall counts up there, and like I said, it is rainfall that they do desperately need. Now the real deal comes in Tuesday afternoon, a very strong cold front brushing the southwest coastal region, really giving Albany a good hammering by the looks of things. This will have very strong winds as well, and as this cold front moves over and across to Tasmania as well, it'll likely gather pace, and we're looking at a big-time severe weather situation for South Australia, Victoria and Tasmania in the later parts of May on Thursday and Friday the 30th and 31st of May respectively. This is a big-time cold front to be moving through, and it's certainly something we're going to be watching very closely on this channel. Now behind it, in the wake of this system, we have another major cold front here developing just offshore. Now this one looks like a serious one. The first day of June looking like it's going to be a wet one, and once again supported by other forecast models, the GFS, the Eastern Rebef, and believe it or not, even though I said the Access G3 was completely bogus this morning, still supporting that exact same situation, only about 12 hours apart from each other. So the next week is going to be a wet one. It's going to be a complete change in season for Western Australia. And then a couple of days behind it, it's going to be a complete change in season for Victoria and Tasmania, and it really does show. I mean, looking at the forecast right now, this is just fantastic to be having on the forecast. And if we go to 10-day rainfall accumulation, widespread up to 50 millimetres, especially around the Perth metro area, the southern suburbs expecting up to 60 millimetres. I know it's nothing crazy, but to finish off May with average rainfall for the month after having 23 days, I believe now, of completely dry weather, it would be absolutely fantastic. We only need 65 millimetres to bring the May totals up to average, which is totally possible with the cold front setup that we have going. I've got my rain gauge all set up, and we're waiting for this rainfall. We desperately need it. And down on the Capes as well, maybe 70 or 80 millimetres there. Down towards Walpole and Pemberton, maybe 100 to 110 millimetres. And offshore, we're looking at about 170 millimetres of rainfall. If it gets itself onshore, it will be fantastic. It'll be an absolute party, that's for sure. This is rainfall that we desperately need, and it will be quenching that drought that we have currently set up across a lot of the southwest corner. And I mean, look at this. Right now, we're sitting in exceptional drought conditions for the Perth metro. Down where I am, we're in exceptional drought conditions, but we've got extreme drought conditions across a lot of the Perth metro. But if you pull this right out to Friday the 31st of May, we're now only looking at mild to moderate drought. This rainfall could be enough to really quench the extreme drought conditions. It's certainly going to be enough for farmers to start seeding, that's for sure. This rainfall is fantastic news, and it looks like it's going to bring in that big wave of moisture that we're expecting in June. I said it a month ago, and I'm going to say it again. Winter is going to be short, it is going to be violent, and it is going to be a complete change when it gets here from what feels like summer. Essentially, we're still certainly in a summer period in Perth and the Perth surrounds, and then it's going to go straight into winter. So it's happening exactly like the forecast was saying, and that is just great. It gives me great confidence in the forecast models for this winter season, which is exactly what we need going into winter. In terms of wind speeds as well, I'm just going to zoom out to the entirety of southwestern Australia, or southern Australia, because it is important that we get everybody mentioned in these videos. Western Australia really expecting some damaging wind gusts from these fronts up to 80 or 90 kilometres an hour. The Perth Metro maybe about 80 kilometres an hour. But these capes down here, they're at risk of getting wind gusts up to 120 kilometres an hour, and they normally do on the winter opener cold front. Very strong wind gusts, so basically a given with those cold fronts that move through. And then down towards the Bass Strait and Tasmania, we're looking at 100 to 110 kilometre an hour wind gusts. Down towards Matsika Island, the windiest place on Australia, we're talking about 110 kilometre an hour winds gusts there. Now, wind accumulation is the maximum wind speed that is expected in the next 10 days. It's a fantastic tool from windy.com. It's great for tropical cyclones, great for winter weather, and I use it every single day to find interesting topics to be talking about in these videos. So if you do want to check it out, I'll leave a link to Windy in the description if I do remember to do so, and you can go and check out their wind accumulation tool. It is absolutely fantastic, and I've got this set up here so that red wind speeds is more than 64 kilometres an hour, i.e. gale force. So you're talking gale force winds anywhere where there is red on this page here, and that might even be gale force winds for a minute in the next 10 days. And then when you're talking about those purples in excess of 100 kilometres an hour, and blacks in excess of 140 kilometres an hour, i.e. storm force winds. Very rare to see those creep up to Australia, but it does happen every now and then. We've been watching it very closely for the last couple of months, just waiting for some cold fronts to move through, and it looks like we finally are, and I'm very, very happy to be reporting that. Now, zooming right out, there's not really much to be talking about apart from this big streak mark in the Philippine Sea, or more so in the Pacific Ocean outside of the Philippine Sea. This is the next part of the video, the Western Pacific Typhoon. Then we're going to be talking about a proper tropical cyclone in the southern hemisphere, which I'll get to in just a minute. Of course, we have to touch on this just for interests north of Australia. But this system, it looks like it is going to be a strong one. The GFS and the ECMWF model now very much on board with a strong typhoon developing later or early on next week and extending right in towards the later parts of next week, Wednesday and Thursday onwards as it moves up towards Japan. There's going to be a lot more coverage on the second channel. There's a link in the iCards above you right now. I'm not going to make an update today, but tomorrow onwards there will be updates on this system and also the Bay of Bengal system as well. But this system looks like it has the chance to get to Category 2 or Category 3 hurricane equivalent status on the Saffir-Simpson scale, which is significantly stronger than the Australian scale. Category 3 on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale can qualify as a Category 5 on the Australian scale. So yeah, it is a crazy scale. I think the Australian scale is just generally all around a pretty weak scale to be using. Now, tropical cyclone, you can see this little swirl here south of the Maldives and India. It's truly in the southwest Indian Ocean, but if I was to get Australia in here as well, it's not awfully far away from it, and I say that very loosely because it is about 4,000 kilometres away, but it is still within sights of Australia. But this system here, definitely no threat to any major land area at all. It is still going to be closer to Australia than it will be to Africa or Madagascar or anything like that, so you could get away with calling it an Australian interest, I guess. But later on in the forecast period, the GFS model is saying that it's going to develop into a low pressure area, probably a tropical low equivalent system. It could get to moderate tropical storm status in the southwest Indian Ocean scale. Again, it's going to be pretty touch and go with that at any point, but it looks like a tropical cyclone is a possibility later on next week from Wednesday onwards. It doesn't have any support from the Eastern Weather Forecast model, just as a really big monsoonal low pressure area. The Axis G3 model doesn't really extend out that far. Oh no, it does actually, and it is calling for a tropical low, a very brief and weak one by the looks of things, forming in the early parts of June. Now this is interesting because it's not often we see tropical lows. In fact, it's very rare that we see tropical lows fire up on the forecast this late after cyclone season. I mean, cyclone season ends on the 1st of May, and we're talking about a potential tropical cyclone on the 1st of June. So this is quite a crazy thing to be looking at. And it is entirely possible. I would like to say that the chances of this holding tropical cyclone status beyond sort of Friday or Saturday next week are very remote, just because of the passage of these ridiculously strong cold fronts moving into the southwest corner of Western Australia. They will have an impact on this tropical cyclone, but there is a slim chance, probably about 20 or 30%, that we do see a tropical cyclone developing here up in just offshore from Indonesia and the Cocos Islands. This is very interesting to be having on the forecast, and every now and then they do track towards the Cocos-Keeling Islands. This little part of the Indian Ocean can fire up tropical cyclones at any time of the year with very little notice, but in this case it looks like we have some good notice to be using. But yeah, that is another very long-winded forecast for very little that is going on around Australia. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any feedback or a suggestion or something you'd like to be covered in a future video, then please do leave it in the comment section down below. I've also been getting a couple of comments about when there is going to be a colour scheme scale for this video. Well, for this windy.com forecast model that I use, or forecast site that I use, I've decided against making one, at least in the short term. I will make one when I've got absolutely nothing to talk about, but right now I've got my hands tied basically with some events happening around Australia, as well as some TAFE work as well that I should be getting through as well. So I will work on that and I'll make it a proper good video once I get a little bit of time up my sleeve, so probably sometime in July or August, hopefully when I get a little bit of a break. I'm also doing a lot of travelling in June as well, so there won't be many updates during the month of June. But apart from that, I've got some pretty big plans for this channel. I really want to grow it before cyclone season 2025. There'll be plenty of prediction videos as well in the lead up to cyclone season 2025. Just a heads up, I'm expecting a good season at this time in terms of tropical cyclone activity. Not expecting many storms to go for the Australian mainland, but there could be a couple of powerful ones in the West Australian area. That's just a heads up for the season of 2025. But that is all for me today. Special shout out to the channel sponsors. Their names are on screen right now, and I'll catch you all in the next show. Goodbye.